Welcome to the oldest social and business club in India, the Bengal Club. Set up in 1827 as a meeting place where people from the military, the judiciary, businessmen, and professionals of the British Empire gathered together. Independence brought about a change in clientele, but not in character. Professionals, businessmen, people from the service sector, bureaucrats, and academics started rubbing shoulders in the corridors of this hallowed institution. Welcome to the library of the Bengal Club, an institution within an institution. A veritable collection of books, the like of which you're unlikely to find anywhere else in the city, and indeed in this country. Recordings by famous speakers who have spoken here in the library, and a collection of books on any subject that you may want to look for. Books by Nobel laureates, books by Bengal Club members, books on political science, philosophy, ethics and morality, food and drinks, sports and culture. Mention the subject and it's available here. There is also a small Wi-Fi corner where you can browse the internet in peace. They say there is no subject under the sun. If you're looking for a book, you will find it on these shelves of the Library of the Bengal. Envy the books, enjoy the collection, but above all, celebrate in the ambience of this wonderful library, the Library of the Bengal Club. Welcome to see the other famous individuals who have launched their books on this site. And recordings of that book launch are also available in this library. Welcome to the Library of the Bengal Club. On behalf of the Library Subcommittee, welcome to this program.
Can't hear you. Can't hear you, Julie.
Thank you, Vivek. It's a lovely start to the evening to have that video on the Bengal Club. And it is a great pleasure to welcome all of you across puddles and ponds, as I like to say, across latitudes and longitudes, to be in exploratory mood on the renowned, celebrated, wearing many hats, author Amit Chaudhary's most recent novel, Sojourn, which whispers of nostalgia, impermanence, forgetting on the one hand, and an understated celebration of living on the other. Actually, as you might agree, Amit Chaudhary has been on a roll. A few days ago, even as he was hitting the headlines with the most recent accomplishment of being bestowed the prestigious Black Date Award for finding the raga, Chaudhary must have been smiling quietly at the eyebrows he was raising with his newest novel, Sojourn, which was simultaneously hitting the shelves at bookstores worldwide. Finding the Raga, an improvisation on Indian music, written in 2021, won the prestigious James State Black Prize for biography that is worth £10,000. Chaudhary wrote much of this memoir during a 9-month residential fellowship in Paris. As I close the novella, under 150 pages. It's my turn to smile at how this writer and singer in the Hindustani classical tradition that I have studied meticulously for my doctoral research on post-colonial South Asian writers, and then subsequently taught his works at the university in Toronto and in other places in North America, has once again landed a strategic googly on his readers with a sleight of a light hand. What is the novel about? A colleague asks me, and I tell her that I've just finished reading Sojourn, which took 5 straight hours to read. It's about a professor who goes to Berlin in 2004 on a fellowship for 4 months. And does he fall in love with someone, she asks? What's his name? I draw blanks. My colleague seems nonplussed. The narrator, also the protagonist, is nameless, is an unstable narrator, and there really is no plot, really. The nameless protagonist meets a German woman, Bridget, with whom he shares a friendship that kind of borders on affection. That's as far as Chaudhary will go with a distinguished alien in Berlin who seems either disinterested or not quite confident in investing any emotional content to build a relationship. However, several saving graces, which all of you will be talking about, where minimalism gives way to joie de vivre in typical understated Amit Chaudhary style, with an explosion of life in the voluptuous imagery of food, which Chaudhary has signposted his success in. For instance, in his memorable descriptions of Christmas fare at the Bengal Club in one of his non-fiction essays, and in the intriguing creation of the character of the Bangladeshi gentleman, Fakhrul Haq, somewhat akin to Mr. Pirzada in Jhumpa Lahiri's short story collection, Interpreter of Maladies. I am hoping to hear much more about Haq from many of you, who is a kind of host or guide, self-appointed, for many of us who visit far-flung places or big metropoles, who is a Mr. Know-all of the city that is really not his. So right from get-go, Amit Chaudhary is one writing himself into the text. And this, I know, is a theme that will be up for discussion. Amit Chaudhary is also signposting the importance of the idea, I think, of heterotopia, which in very simple words is a word which signifies a space of possibilities. I think the humor, which is understated too, comes through rather explicitly, such as the toilet bowl in which he parks himself, which was once parked on by Kenzabaru Ui. And so heterotopia is the toilet. In a hotel, which doesn't really belong to anybody, that space becomes a space for multifarious, multi-interest possibilities of multiple people with multitudinous insights and voices. So there is this multiplicity, there is this disjoint, there is dysfunctionality, and to some of us, it is a novel of dystopia. Charming, charming as it is in many places, for instance, where he goes walking down a footpath and sees the mall where he's going to purchase a jacket. The spaces, I think, speak to me in many ways. Here is a man who has studied Indian classical music meticulously, and there is some sort of intersection, I find, between the spaces in the cadences and in the talas of the ragas and in the spaces of big city Berlin. Again, up for discussion, and I'm hoping that we're all going to be bringing new insights onto this open window of architecture of music aligned to the architecture of images that are prevalent, represented in the novel. The last word and quote.
10 বার করে বলছিস কেন? আমি তো যাবো রে বাবা। না না শোন না।
Shemonti, can we please mute everyone?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I'm trying.
Thank you so much.
Ridiculous.
I apologize for this disturbance.
ও আমার ভয়েস মেসেজ রাকামাসি আমি করছি, রশিদ কাকু গাইবে,
Raka Sen, may I request you to put your...
তুই গেলে তো যেতামই।
Oh dear. So, as I was saying, I want to leave you with this last thought of the city of Berlin being a city of smoke and mirrors. I think an idea that we will hear about possibly from Anusuya and from Sangeeta. Berlin, remember, now, beer drinking, myriads of fun time people sitting out in the sun in summer, leaning against the same wall that used to house gas chambers. Berlin is a city of spaces that are indeterminate, that cannot be pigeonholed or stereotyped. There is a certain fluidity between those spaces that we see now of great happiness, but once in recent history of murders, millions of Jews. So with that, and with a request to please keep muted when you're not speaking and to keep to a 3-minute time limit, may I ask Vivek Krishna to open the floor today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. Yeah, I love the book actually. So that I think is going to come out very strongly with what I want to say today. And I did find such strong echoes of the way Finding the Raga is written and the way this book is written. Subject matter is different, but he juxtaposes the way he writes in a very, very similar fashion. And I want to start off by let me just get rid of some brief notes which I promptly lost. Goodness.
Harish, can you please unmute?
Sorry, I'm keeping you all waiting.
That's okay, Vivek. Perfectly fine. Take your time. No worries.
Why do computers eat up what you're trying to say? Yeah, okay, here we are. It goes without saying that Amit Chaudhary is a masterful writer who creates his own subtle, thought-provoking stories in a thoroughly demanding style. There's something dreamlike about Sojourn, illusory in one dimension, and in other minutely and closely described. Hilary Mantel said he has, like Proust, perfected the art of the moment. He is a miniaturist for whom tiny moments become radiant and for whom the complexities of the fleeting mood uncurl onto the page like a leaf, a petal. The book for discussion today is a dramatic and disconcerting work of fiction, a book about the present which slips into the past. It paints a picture of Berlin and of a troubled mind. A historical novel set in an ostensibly post-historical time, a haunting story which very often seems to exist only in the protagonist's mind. He says, at my talk, there was a furtive man. I haven't decided if I mean furtive or entertaining. There's a kind of person who does things quietly, who pretends they're invisible while blocking the view. It's as if they believe that not being aware of themselves is a guarantee that others can't see them. The author goes on to address social and political issues obliquely, achieving his end by a close focus on mundane daily happenings, often strangely portrayed so that ordinary occurrences feel unusual and otherworldly. The bathroom was almost miraculous. It was wide but long, with a bath and a shower. As in a golf course, you felt there was always more to come. Very unusual juxtaposition. A woman named Birgit enters his world and a romance slowly takes root. Or does it? And then she suddenly disappears. At the same time, Birgit is inexplicably juxtaposed with an elderly white-haired woman who emerges from the narrator's spare bedroom. And the narrator begins to lose himself in Berlin, disturbingly prehistory, which begins to crumble around him. I keep walking. In which direction? I'm not sure, the narrator explains. I've lost my bearings, not in the city, but in its history. Also, constantly present is the city's sense of history, the site of the Berlin Wall, the World War II rotten tooth relic of a church's bombed tower, a spot from which Jews were sent to the camps. The Brandenburg Gate came up, lit, resplendent, a sovereign without purpose. And then food is another thing that the author loves to write into his pages. The next morning, I had a dark brown bread I'd never had before with coffee. I buttered it and ate it untoasted. Amit's love of language and the way he constructs his sentences, his paragraphs, and even his chapters is everywhere in the book, echoing his earlier work, Finding the Raga. I love the narrator's description of Fakhrul's preemptive air. And again, we went to the basement and tried on shoes lined with fur. The tips were rounded. They emanated a native sorrow. If feet have souls, mine were unprepared for the warmth in which they found themselves. And then Fakhrul examines a pair of shoes. They're good, he said, narrowing his eyes, like he was assessing weaponry. Or the way the narrator and Birgit climbed the stairs with the urgency of childhood friends. And elsewhere he notes, around this time, Gunter Grass was in Calcutta, discovering, Columbus-like, its garbage heaps and poor. Fakhrul ducked, incorrigible in repentance. His body rocked. Because he was a smoker, the laughter was like a kettle's hiss. It filled the dark space. So the visiting narrators increasingly cut adrift in a city which not long ago was two cities, east and west, each cut off from the other, much as the newly unified city is cut off from the divided one of the past. There's a place where the unnamed narrator comes down the stairs and says, I'd forgotten what Fakhrul looked like, but he smiled at me, and I smiled back distantly. This sentiment personifies the exact relationship between the author and us, his readers. I've opened my eyes and the sun rushes in, we read, as Sojourn reaches its hallucinatory conclusion. Thank you.
I can't but jump in here, Vivek, and say that you have echoed some of the strongest sentiments that one can have while reading this. If one knows a little bit about Chowdhury, I want to draw your attention to this one paragraph. If I remember, it's almost embedded in my mind. As I came down the stairs, I saw a man in an ash-colored plastic jacket, what Vivek was talking about. And then, in inverted commas, Isho, he said, navigating. He was shorter and older than me. What is worth noting here, there's the point that Vivek brought out about the fluidity of language which is represented in this novel. And the use of the vernacular, the Bengali word Esho, lends the text, I think, a certain kind of authenticity, perhaps, of culture. It captures the element of the familiar in an alien land. The storytelling in Sojourn reminds me of his earlier books, A Strange and Sublime Address, Afternoon Rag, and Freedom Song. It is almost his nature as a writer to include and pepper his English writing with Indian words. And I think there's something to be said about that. There's something to think about that. Perhaps Chaudhary is showing what post-colonial Indian writers in English try to do, right? So thank you, Vivek, for opening that door. And I really couldn't resist jumping in. Thank you. Shebonti, if you're around, would you like to throw in what you have found alluring in this novel? We always love your insights. Go right ahead.
Hello, am I audible? Everybody, it's
Yes, yes.
good evening, everyone. It's a special honor and privilege for all of us to discuss about a book which has been written by our very own Mr. Amit Chaudhary, as he is a member of Bengal Club. And this particular book, the novel begins with the sentence that it was evening and I didn't know the name of the road I was taken to. This particular sentence, I think it gives the impression of a typical stranger who is coming to a new land, who is completely, for him, the land is completely unknown, and therefore that narrator doesn't even know the name of the street or the name of the road where he is traveling. So there is a kind of it is very typical of a person who is a newcomer to a place. And I would also like to comment on the particular German phrases, the German terms that the author has used. This usage of the local language, this has brought in an atmosphere, this has created an atmosphere that of the land that he's writing about, the land that he's talking about. And all these terms really, since I've studied German at one point of my life, so these make the book more interesting for a reader like me. And this is historical. It takes us back to the streets of Berlin. Although written in the post-colonial era, this is, according to me, this is a very special feature of the book, that the reader gets the opportunity to treat back along the memory lane if someone has already been to that country. And I would like to add one more point, which I personally felt. I would like to speak in German. Ich möchte nach Deutschland fahren. That means I would like to travel to that land, which I have not yet been. Of course, people who know the language will exactly understand what I mean. And overall, it's quite a simple read, although there are many subjects, there are many themes which are very, very deep in nature, and it gives the reader to think a lot about the country, its history, how transitions have taken place, how transformations have taken place. And the ending also I like very much, because I find that, like, although it's a novel, it's in the autobiography, it's a novel, but there is a feeling as if it's a short story. Like, it doesn't really end. I found that the ending has a lot of message to convey, and it gives enormous opportunity to the reader to interpret according to his or her own thoughts. That's the mark of a great author, that is very objective in approach. And it's a first person autobiographical narration. There is no name of the person, which is very, very objective in nature. This is typical of modern work of literature. So that is why I like it very much. Thank you.
Oh, Shevanti, that was absolutely on the money, because you have invoked an author and a writer and a critic of the 1920s, who many of us know as Roland Barthes. And he talks about the death of the author with the birth of the reader. So once the author has written, as you say, because the ending is open-ended, you're giving the opportunity to the reader to make their own conclusions.
Their own interpretations. We have a lot of opportunities to interpret according to our thoughts.
Yes.
So there is no real didacticism. There's no forceful element in it.
Yes.
That's
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you. I would like to just say a word about Professor Arundhati Ray being here. She is an icon we've always looked up to, and quite a mover and shaker in the educational field at Calcutta University. So welcome, Professor Arundhati Ray. And my next on the list is our very own Mrs. Anshu Munshi, who will expound and explicate this, I hope, with some elements of psychology. She is a psychologist, a trained psychologist. So go ahead, Anju.
Good evening, everybody. It's great seeing everybody, take an active interest in different kinds of interpretations. To me, I think this book is a journey of delving deep within oneself. It's a stranger trying to find a passage into his inner core. And for a tough job like this, it becomes imperative and convenient to get a voice that makes you get over your prejudices and complex moral and social dilemmas. There is a tendency for all the writers to step out of themselves and to create a persona. It's called the user persona. It helps them stay away from themselves and yet, find a mouthpiece for what they believe in, their views and their perspectives. They want to come out of the confines of propriety, protocol, and adopt a heretical narrative. To me, it appears that the author very cleverly and most ingeniously steps out of himself, this is my way of looking at it, and engages Fakhrul as a user persona. Fakhrul explains and narrates and demonstrates the complex issues of someone who hails from Calcutta, blacklisted for his infamous composition, and thereby he adds a real touch to somebody who is an alien and who is a little distraught and a little disconnected from everybody else. The subconscious comes forth. In Fakhrul, I could see the validation or otherwise of the author's beliefs and viewpoints. To quote, Fakhrul knew those who manned the kiosks, and the kiosks were like bunkers. Further again, this is pork. Oh, yes. Eating breakfast was an extension of insulting Allah. He found it delicious on many levels. Blasphemy is a religious experience. I think that explains it. Fakhrul also tends to break into Bengali. He sings Bengali lyrics. He has Bengali food as against the Parmesan, pesto, and fettuccine. There's a mention of begun bhaja like aubergines, Indian takeaways like kurma, pulao, aloo dum, dal, etc., rice and chicken. All these inherently point at the comfort zone of the author. There is a kind of a territory which he is trying to step in off and on to find his feet, to find his comfort ground. But deep-rooted and very, I will not say visibly underlined, but deep-rooted and finely underlined is a sense of despair. there is a feeling of not belonging anywhere. To quote, I wander off, a vagrant, I gravitate, I feel a pull in different directions. I have lost my bearings. I think Vivek also quoted the same lines. And there is a mixture of desperation, fatalism, annoyance. There is some annoyance also. And there is a sense of failure. It may not be very strong, but there is a mixture of desperation, annoyance, fatalism, and failure. There's a buoyancy, there's an air of despondency, which actually makes me think. And I went back a couple of lines, a couple of pages to get up and understand better. And obviously, when I finished the book, I wanted to know more. So it's not incomplete, but in its being incomplete, there is an air of completion. There is a sense of completion in the fact that the book does not reveal everything, is a little foggy, is a little confused, but that's the texture of the book, and that by itself is the what do I say? This the summarizing of the emotions of the protagonist. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anju. While you were speaking, I was thinking of the title of the book, which is Sojourn. And all that you have said somehow points.
Going inside, yes.
Yes, it's a sojourn. And it's also the outside is a temporary journey. So how do you make sense of this tenuous existence outside and internalize it? So your points about the user persona, that the unnamed narrator, the unstable narrator, uses the persona of Mr. Fakhrul and expresses perhaps what he wants to through Fakhrul is most impressive. Thank you so much, Anju.
Thank you.
Anusuya Pal, looking forward to yours. Always on the money, critical, and with great veracity. I'm looking forward to what you have to say. Go ahead.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. So I will not really talk so much about the story in so many words, but how I received the writing. So the best way in which I can express it, it was like reading a collection of events. The events were kind of abrupt in the way they started and they finished. And often I found, he just writes one paragraph and that's the chapter, and it's kind of unrelated to what came before and what comes after. There was no planned chronological order. So it was kind of very staccato in the style of narration. And so therefore, although such a small book, I really was disconcerted and not able to read it in one sitting. I had to put it down because it was not easy for me to process the meanderings of the narrative. And there was no, it's not a book that I could have immediately reviewed. But when I put distance between the reading and I went back to it later, I began to see it differently. And there were many experiences which were brought to memory concurrently by the narrator. So there were many things coexisting simultaneously on a very smoky canvas, and they were revealing different impressions left behind on the narrator's mind. Therefore, the telling style had no defined beginning or end. And it felt like I had accidentally trespassed into a person's dream and was witnessing myriad thoughts and impressions, creating a very smoky illusion with one thing in common, and that was the feeling of gloom, hopelessness, fearlessness, and a kind of nothing to look forward to, coming forth. And the only way in which, like, some kind of a locus was given was when Jones recommended that the narrator visit the Jewish Museum. And then I realized that this is what the author was wanting to create, a discomforting experience of a city which carries in its history the Holocaust and the horrors that surrounded it. So, although written in 2005, 60 years after the Second World War, the last page of the book and the moment describing the white haired lady at the clothesline, I felt the hopelessness of the spirit of the people who were entrapped at that time, and the narrator's very fine articulation of the despair that they would have experienced by those who that was experienced by those who lived through the Holocaust. That the routineness of the everyday, that there was very little space within which one could stretch oneself, and that was it, the scope of your life. So yes, I think that is what the author tried to convey, and he was very successful in putting that down in words. And yeah, that was how I interpreted the book.
Thank you, Anusuya. Could we please unmute whoever's here? Please, can Mrs. Bubna, can we unmute?
Yes, hello.
Anusuya, I think you've made an excellent point, and it points to the aspect of the dystopic strains that you hear in the haunting novel. And each incident is almost disjointed from the other. So I do believe that when you gesture towards the Holocaust, you are also in a way knitting history that happened 65 years ago, as you say, or more, to what is happening now. And it's that same space being occupied or being rationalized in a totally different manner. So I think that's extremely interesting that you brought up that point. Thank you for that. Urmi, let's have your view. Go ahead. Mrs. Urmi Sinha, please.
Yeah, I enjoyed the book, Sojourn. I felt it was a travelogue, and I think, I have visited Berlin recently in 2019, and, I would definitely say I've met people who actually have the dreams of going and studying there, and, they have a lot of, desire to study in Germany, to study. I went to a German class, so they had the desire to go to Berlin and study in Germany. I'm an engineer myself, and I felt that the infrastructure that they have built in those times has not had any mention, but it was just excellent, beyond par. And the way he describes the loneliness, I think it is like a first-hand information for students who would like to go over there and like to study. The way he has described the Dalim, the way he was asked to stay. I actually found that the people over there, they think that when he has said, it's okay for him to get a place in the. It's okay for people to stay, and use toilets which can be wet, because they believe that Indians stay in huts. I actually felt that in the US also, but that is not the case. We actually have much better infrastructure out here. And, but that is the sort of thought, I think we have not been able to convey the fact or communicate in some way that our living standards are much higher than, staying in the huts. So this is one thing I wanted to do. And number 2 point is, even about the fall of the Berlin Wall, you see, he has talked about it in 2004. He said 6 years back, I don't have much memory. My memory was quite bleak. But the Berlin Wall, they said even grains of the Berlin Wall were important. But when I went in 2019, you won't believe that I actually saw that the Berlin Wall was nothing more than just a tourist spot. So I believe that, the times, with time, the history and memories fade. And you know, today, though the Berlin Wall is not existing, we are actually creating virtual walls are getting created, because I see the way the Soviet Union is having the, you know, rather Russia is having a war with Ukraine. And, you know, virtual walls are actually built up. There are people actually traveling with much more ease. They were traveling earlier. But today, you know, I find that the virtual walls are being created, which is not a very positive thing. And also I felt that, you know, this scenario which I read, many of these things I feel is changing with time, though this was wrapped in the past. Even he mentions about, you know, this Cardiff and Wittenberg Platz, Charlottenburg, all these places, they're actually sort of good places to purchase, but he's actually given a very bleak and morose look about those places, you know. But the fact is, today it's hustling and bustling with people. You cannot imagine the level of crowd I actually went and saw. And even the Jewish museum, he said he's just run, and in the last minute he's gone inside and he's gone and seen. We actually, to see that museum, we actually had to go and put get a time slot, pay before, and only then get in over there. And we had to be there 15 minutes before the time was allotted to us. So, you know, a lot of these things have changed. And one thing I liked about, you know, when Budget said that, you know, what is the difference, I would like to bring this, that, you know, what is the difference between what we've lost our sense of family, she says. Okay, we're alone. You know, that perfectly describes the scenario there, which I felt. People are very lonely over there. Even though there's a lot of hustle bustle, people are very lonely. But we Indians today, we are, with all our nuclear families, I think we are just losing the value of the family as such, you know. And what we actually value, and if we can value and cherish, the loneliness which I felt over there was actually very well portrayed in this book. And, you know, in 4 months' time, if he had felt so lonely and, you know, found the company of Budget and whoever, there are other children who actually go and do the same thing. It may not be that, you know, they are sort of connected to the heart, but they actually, just because of loneliness, they just go and meet people and make friends and then, you know, just move on. So those parts I don't think have changed. But I felt that, you know, that many things have changed, and with time, uh, and I felt also that Fakrul, you know, was a very good find for him. And Fakrul was a person who was willing to share everything, including his own girlfriend. But, you know, that is not a very normal thing. Usually when people go to new countries, it's not that you find so many people who are so helpful. Whereas the author in general was a more of an observer, and he was just listening on and just chugging along, more than just sharing, just as a personality as he has portrayed. So I think in general, I do not know psychologically and all that, but in general, you know, these are my inferences out of the book.
Yeah, very insightful, Urmi. And you've just made me think, and many of us, I think, would agree perhaps with you, that there is an air of disjuncture, disconnect, you know. So the need for that warmth and the need for human touch, literally, yes, and figuratively,
yes,
is very pronounced in his fleeting relationship with Budget. Yes. So again, you bring to mind, because I was forced to study, literally forced. I didn't know Amit Chaudhary's works. I was forced to study Amit Chaudhary since A Strange and Sublime Address and everything else, but all those other books, Freedom Song. But the point about him is that, don't forget, again, he is an author writing himself into the text, because every summer he is teaching creative writing in England or in Europe or wherever. Usually it's England. So it's a lot of lived experience that he is talking about.
He's able to convey.
Yeah. So did you
He's
feel
able
that
to
as
convey,
well?
and I think it's a very good book for, you know, newcomers who would like to go to those lands. It's a very good introduction.
It's a reality check, huh?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Anas. Thank you, Urmi. Dr. Paramita Mukherjee Malik, our resident poet, are you here?
Yes,
Lovely.
very much here.
Lovely.
Very
Let's
much.
hear your insights.
Yeah, thank you, Julie Di. And this book, like Julie Di said, I'll start with Julie Di's word. Like when Fakhrul says Esho, I found it very nice, while reading it, so many words of Bengali he puts in like Kamonacho, Esho, Bosho, Ekhane Eshe Bosho. Like, and Amit Chaudhary has weaved Bengali words so beautifully. It was a beautiful, a beautiful tapestry of words. Because and I felt a person who doesn't know Bengali, he or she will also understand it in a way he has put it. Similarly, like Shebunti said, she talked about German. No, I don't know German. I don't know the language German, but I've been to Germany many times, but not to Berlin. But the thing is, like even the German, when he uses the German language sometimes, I feel he has weaved that so nicely. Like when his housekeeper is talking to him, he's not understanding, but he's just nodding his head and saying, yes, please, as if like, obviously she was asking him how he is or something of that sort, which we could really understand. So I loved the weaving of his story. I loved the simple read, and it's a very quick and simple read. And it was like just, you didn't have to stress yourself. It was, the language is beautiful, like again, Julie Di, I'll quote you, it's very fluid. The language is so beautiful and very, very like as if flowing out, like. And so I felt it's a nice book to read. And again, the very interesting point of this book is, like, again quoting Julie Di, that it doesn't have a plot, but still, you're waiting for a plot. Must be something is going to happen, but all through it's just his journey out there in Berlin. So it was quite a nice read.
Thank you, Dr. Paramita. And the points you made about language really did appeal to me too. And especially if you're looking at Indian writers in English, of which you are so much a part of as a poet, then we get to understand the nuances of that culture, right? So the first thing we say in our language is Esho Bosho Kecho, so that aspect of have you eaten is a very Eastern concept of welcoming a stranger. Absolutely. Thank you so much. We will move on to our very hallowed collection of guests today. I'm looking so forward. And may we first start with Professor Ripandi Lepcha. She is from Gangtok. Ripandi, are you here?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, looking forward. Go ahead.
Good evening, Julie ma'am, and good evening, everyone. Like, I'm so honored to be here with all the esteemed personalities. Thank you, ma'am, for, in this busy schedule, like, I actually thought that, yeah, I have to read this book. And then I read this book. Thank you so much. And then it was a really, amazing book. So thank you so much. It's like Amit Chaudhary sir, like he has really made the mundane extraordinary again in this text as well. So basically the title, like the very title, it suggested me like Sojourn. It said like, okay, fine, there is a home to go back to. So the narrator has a home to go back to. So the very title suggested that. So the very idea of being in an alien country, in a foreign land and searching for familiarity. So it was Fakhrul, Mr. Fakhrul, who was giving him that familiarity. And then the very, concept, time and again, he brings up these sentences and words saying that, but my need for home made itself present to me. And I wasn't conscious of it till Goethe's arrivals on Friday evenings. And then another one, he says that we all have an appetite for home. And then there's again another line where he goes on to say, especially when he goes to Bajit's place, a foreign, again, he has just met her, she is a stranger there, and then he goes there, and then he says, I'm not convinced that this is real food. And then she replies, she replies saying that, okay, like I'll make dal for you next time. So like it's like how food becomes a vehicle to carry like culture and familiarity or home. To foreign places, and that is what struck me, because like though like I have been I used to work in Perdong Government College in Kalimpong, and I'm very recently transferred to Darjeeling Government College, though it's just very near and everything is similar, yet there's a sense of displacement there. So I could sense that in this particular text, though he's gone there as a professor and then he's like like giving lectures and seminars and all, but yet the strings that are pulling him, that always somehow making him think of home, bringing about the nostalgia. And especially when he is having a conversation with Bridget, where he says, the headscarf, it reminded him of somebody else in the past at home. So again, that also brings about another context, saying that will the present do some kind of remedy for the past? He's talking about the headscarf, and then how he could never be together with that particular woman because she belonged to a different culture in India. So like would it have been possible had they been in Germany then? So the question always remains that, because whenever we move into the third space or an alien space or a foreign land, there is this possibility of the boundaries being blurred and the gaps being bridged. So that is what I actually felt while reading this particular novel. And then as like even the other thing that struck me in this particular novel is the proximity of geographical places like Bangladesh and Bengal. It's so the proximity of these two places, it reflected the similarity and food and culture and even language, the Bangla that he speaks. And then it's so familiar, it gives a taste of familiarity and even a sense of comfort, that he like kind of even says when he's actually wearing those shoes, that the comfort, if my feet have soles, then maybe I can have I could sense that particular comfort, my feet would have definitely felt that. So all of these things of comfort, familiarity, all of these senses of being home in a foreign land, home away from home, this particular idea, it struck me, like all these struck me while reading this particular text. And then the one thing that I really wanted to focus on was, this particular text, the very title, all right, it reflects the age-old belief that life on earth is impermanent. So like the impermanence of life is also reflected in this particular text. So the idea that the idea that there is a home to go back to is evident in this novel. And then it somehow, even in this particular state of despair, gives a hope that there is this narrator, the nameless narrator, always has a home to go back to. So that is my understanding. So thank you so much.
Excellent. Absolutely kosher on your point about the idea of home and identity. And I was thinking of the last conversation you and I had with Prajwal Parajuli. Do you remember?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
And this is very similar, the idea of citizenship, belonging, being in some ways cut off. And the good part is that in a sojourn, you always know that it's a short term and you have always got a permanent home.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Ripandi. That was excellent, Professor Ripandi.
Thank you.
With great pleasure, I call upon Dr. Jean Carroll Ewart, if you would give us your explication on Sojourn.
Well, thank you, everybody. And I want to start by saying that I had never read Amit Chaudhury's work before. And it was such a pleasure to be introduced to it and through this beautiful and poetic novel. I have now, gone to the library and found all the rest of his works so that I can read everything else also. It's always such a pleasure to meet someone that you have not met before and say, I feel a kindred spirit here. And I agree with the people who have said the text is fragmented, that is plotless. I think that's the point. I tended to think of it as an extended poem with a theme of, I think I want to say anomie. The soul is isolated from his surroundings. and I thought, at first I thought, what is the source of this enemy? So he is a stranger in a strange land, and he's working to find his way culturally to make sure that he doesn't make mistakes. He's worried about offending, which is something we have all felt when we travel. And I thought it's that he's in this place that he doesn't fully understand, that seems familiar because he's been there before, and yet it's not familiar. And then I thought, as the Holocaust references became stronger and stronger, I thought, this is about the city's memory of its past, and it's flinching away from the very painful memory of the war, and its complicity in the horrors of that war. And then, as the narrative circled more and more around the wall, I thought, no, it's a city divided against itself, and the soul is experiencing what it is to be self-divided. So there were many, many ways to look at it. I don't want to say that one was right or one was wrong, because I think that they are all there, in the way that a poem is multivalent and you can read it in many ways. But I would say that I really identified with that feeling of anxiety and of being not quite at home, unheimlich in the world, or finding the world unheimlich. But it was just beautifully expressed. I really related to it, and I was so grateful to have read it.
Thank you, Jean. As always, you point us towards a different picture. And when you were talking about unheimlich, I was thinking of Freud's idea of being unhoused from the womb.
Yes, so was I.
Yeah, and incredible that you should mention Freud at this juncture, because it is also a kind of primal wound, being estranged from the womb and wanting to go right back there. So thank you for that. That was an excellent explication. And I think the author would be very pleased if you would meet him on the 6th of December, as we have all planned, if it all works out, to know that you thought of it as a poem. That's an enormous compliment. So thanks again very much for that, Jean. That was excellent, as usual. Dr. Roma Bhattacharya, if you're here, we would love to hear your views.
Good evening, Julie. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening to you and to the Bengal Club family. Thank you for having me. This evening is very personal to me, as Amit Chaudhary and I were probably sojourners at Oxford University around the same time, but separated by temporality, as in those days, I was a Shakespearean scholar and I resided heart and soul in the 1590s in Elizabethan England. And later, of course, as you know, I inhabited a Senegal to Tokyo existence, serving suffering humanity for the United Nations. So it is an especial honor and privilege to be at this meeting dedicated to such a distinguished writer. I love the title Sojourn. The long echoing vowels encapsulate the lack of permanence and the deracinated existence or essence of a diasporic nomadic existence. A complex set of semiotics, all captured in images. A street that has no name, the unfamiliarity of the dark German pumpernickel bread, the Bengali-speaking Fakhrul, who appears so paradoxically unfamiliar at the beginning to the Bengali writer persona. Calcutta, a possible homeland, but not visited for 40 years. Even one's roots become shadowy and consciousness is replete with forgettings. Chaudhary has been praised rightly, as Vivek said, as a miniaturist. And my brief sojourn into Chaudhary left me with a sense of a fine chronicler of moments, a patina of his globalized consciousness that is geographically fractured and yet together in a post-colonial mosaic, from Bengali to Bratwurst. Professor Amartya Sen has lauded the quiet in Chaudhary's writing, and I would also add the invisibility. I will end by saying the writer inhabits a double discursive invisibility, both in terms of the decentered narrator who is invisibly present, but as moments of consciousness, and also in the subject of his writing are invisible diasporic moments of, to quote James Wood, uncertainty, exile, elegy, absence, and the premonition of loss. In some way, Chaudhry's writing is an enactment of multiple silences in a strident world, including where somewhere in the penumbra is the Berlin Wall, with gestures perhaps to the partition of Bengal, a style of writing where perhaps a hinterland of screams have become transformed into gaps, silences, and fine art. Thank you.
Wonderfully, dramatically read, most persuasive, as always. Thank you, Roma. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I would like to call on Raka Mukherjee, who has always done us proud and is a standing scholar at Calcutta University who's completed her master's. Raka, if you're here, go right ahead.
Good evening, ma'am. Good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to be back again and with this book, Sojourn. And I must mention before I start giving my 2 bits on the beautiful novel is that in the very introduction of the meeting, Julie ma'am talks of heterotopias. And it cannot be another coincidence, but it is that today I will be discussing some heterotopic spaces and negotiate food and the tongue, the speech that we find in the book. So the most interesting part of the book was how Chaudhry inculcates the language of Bengali and the taste of Bengali and familiar food with the German tongue. There are relationships or friendships that forms that do not translate through language, but through the expression of food, habits of home and familiarity, beginning with the character of Fakhrul. So at the beginning, the narrator of Chaudhry is actually very, as he said, I'm not nonplussed by Fakhrul, but the familiarity of how he calls upon him with the word Esho. When we greet someone in Bengali and we are unknown to the person, we say Ashun, or we say Apni. But the familiarity that Fakhrul jumped right at and said and called him Esho, it's you call someone who you know very closely with that kind of intimacy, with the translation from Apni to Tumi. And a similar conversation, if I may read out a few lines, is with his house help Greta, where his house help has been she does not know English and she's requesting him to bring washing powder, and she's saying that these clothes needs to be washed. And what he is wondering is, I wonder if she gets a holiday, if she gets to go out on weekends, or if she's happy. And the not understanding, the silence and the gap, as Dr. Bhattacharya just mentioned in the conversation, I think fills in that heterotopic space or the heterotopia of deviation, where both of them exist, coexist, both of them are dependent on each other through labor, the labor of housework done by Greta and some compensation that the ball professor is giving to his house help. But the conversation is very human, and the conversation is almost in a telepathic level, where both human beings want the best for each other, but they cannot translate it through their tongues. Similarly, the character of Birgit, to me, reminded of things she might have said, she might not have said. I thought at some spaces Chaudhary's narrator have imagined the intimacy that they actually had, because the moment when she sends the mail that I want to meet you and I wish you a Merry Christmas in advance, and then they go into the restaurant where he witnesses the couple dancing and he offers to share a dessert. It's a very intimate act to offer to share a dessert with someone when you meet them for the first time. But perhaps it is the connection with Birgit, or the smile, or the invitation that made Chaudhary belong there. There's another instance in the novel where they are watching the film Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum. It's a very common Bollywood film that they are watching. And while watching it, Chaudhary mentions that he was excited. He was almost excited about the idea of being imprisoned by Kabhi Khushi Kabhi Gum for 3 hours. And while they were sharing the screen space watching the movie, that was probably the night before she disappears without an explanation, which we later come to know was to look after her mother, her mother. And right after then, the novel becomes disintegrated into events that we don't know are connected. But we do understand the intimacy that he develops, the idea of family that he mentions, as he say, what matters to we, by we mean Germans. Chaudhary's narrator has forgotten the roots of his homeland. And like the language, he says again, when you used to speak of when you were a child. So I think this sojourn is the growth of the personal growth of the change of tongue. And finally, at the last line of the poem, when he says that there's a routine where he can hear the familiar voice of Greta, and I'm sure both of them still don't understand each other, but they have the company and they are dependent on each other. So I think Sojourn is as a collage, if I may say, of taste, tongue, and speech, like an enjambment that places Chaudhary's narrator in the very familiar land of Berlin, and the fragments of the Berlin Wall might be a metaphor of his fragmented memories of belonging, and making the entire Sojourn an actual heterotopia where he negotiates his identity as a ball professor and as a friend. Thank you.
Such a felicitous explication, Raka. That was a wonderfully insightful, perceptive, and a whole range of perspectives dwelling on the tongue, which, as you know, is a great delight for me to unpackage. The very act of writing and speaking becomes an act of translation. And to think of a word that goes with your wonderful presentation, I find, is chutnification, with ellipses, lapses, aporias, gaps, hollows, omissions, and becomes a new playground for an inventive wordsmith and storyteller like Chaudhary.
Absolutely, ma'am.
And I was also thinking, if you remember that beautiful short story that you and the class, the master's class, had talked about, Mom's short story, remember? The relationship between the housekeeper and the master.
Yes, yes.
All came a cropper. So you see, these are strands that you've beautifully got together in a bouquet. And when you relate translation of emotion as well as taste, as well as language, it becomes a very rich enclave to explore. Thank you very much, Raka. Marvelous.
Thank you. Thank you.
May I call upon another young master scholar, Anushka Hazra. Anushka, what did you make of Sojourn?
So, ma'am, when I first started reading this book, what really stood out to me was the style of narration, because this is something we wouldn't normally read in class. And I approached this book as someone who would move out of home in near future. So I had those anxieties about, finding someone I can rely on. And the two most formative events in the book were the encounter with Bridget and falling sick, because those two events, like, I worry about them constantly. Like, what would happen to me if I were alone and in a place where I didn't know anyone who would take care of me? And while I was reading the book, I constantly thought of the wasteland, because so many things happen at once. So it was a bit disquieting while reading it, but then I got used to it after a point of time. And once the narrator fell sick, I was like, okay, one hurdle is crossed, he can move on to the next. And because so many of my friends have moved out of home to study in places like Berlin and Belgium, it almost felt like I was reading into their stories. So that's everything that I thought of while reading this book.
Very interesting how you suture the personal to the larger picture. That's quite exciting. And as a new voice, Raka, would you say that this experience of a lived connection between the author and the reader lends a new kind of refreshing exploration of the novel?
Absolutely. And I think, as you mentioned, the death of the author, it's in all the texts, all the works we read, especially works when it's about migration, it's about the change of homeland. I think we all at some point of our lives, if not physically, if it's not a geographical migration, we meet so many people in the sojourn of our life, if I might use the title, and say that we take their experiences and we always read to them in relation to what we have experienced. So I think the lived experience, for example, as Bengalis, as a Bengali myself, when I am reading the novel, the Bengali phrases are so warm, so familiar, and it's making me sympathetic towards Fakhrul, although he has been, there's a point where he has been exiled from Bangladesh because of his blasphemous comments. And also the quote, blasphemy is religious, when Chaudhary mentions. So, I think what Anushka just mentioned, it stands for every work we read, because as humans, we only relate to the emotions, to the feelings, emotions, and experiences in comparison with what we have experienced.
Thank you, Raka. Vivek, if I can just draw upon your opinion on this, what makes Amit Chaudhary's book so relatable and so connecting to you as a reader? Because you had the most wonderful things to say about how you had flown with the book. You really had no problems with the book.
Well, I think the basic thing that there's a warm humanity in it that he puts together, even with all the discordance and the dystopia. That line of that humanity which he gets with the various characters, he puts that, and then he keeps putting you off balance, because he's shifting from that quicksand that he puts you into, and then he moves away to something else. The thing that I really admire about him is that he starts off on one chapter, and then he goes on to something else for 2-3 chapters, and the 4th chapter he's come back to what he's talking about 3 chapters earlier, and it comes to you as a oh, that's nice, we're actually back to where we started, and he hadn't actually bought that coat there, he's now buying it here. I thought that really was fascinating, the way of doing that. Yeah. And I didn't actually want to, I didn't mention any point as far as the Bengali usage of Bengali, but that itself is a huge dimension that comes into the story. And, he moves it, and yet a non-Bengali would also, take it in his stride. It's not something that's alienating you. It's actually creating a bond between the two characters as they're talking. Yeah, I thought that was really interesting about it.
That's an excellent point, Vivek, that you've added to the palimpsest to Raka and to Anushka's. If I may just turn to Urmi, you talked about your personal feelings when you were in Berlin. Vinod, I just want to say I haven't forgotten you, my dear. You're very important to us. But I just want to pick up on these points and then turn to you. So, Urmi, how would you, all that we've been talking about, Dr. Jean Ewart Carroll's idea of unheimlich being taken out of the womb, this idea of being homeless, and then Raka and Anushka and Vivek talking about no, there, he does connect in different ways. So do you think he's because you're a voracious reader, do you think then that he's also a strategic writer? He uses writing skills to forge that relationship with the reader?
Yeah, I actually think that, I agree with Dr. Jean that, he has, when we go to another country, how we feel, we've left our own homeland and, we've got sort of uprooted ourselves and gone there. I felt that when I went to the US, and I still have that longing to come back. So even it's like the child coming out of the womb, it's actually sort of, it doesn't want to, it wants to be very comfortable over there in the mother's womb. But the fact is, we tug him out and take him out and, so what I'm trying to say, when we actually go to other countries, we go with a lot of dream and things like that. But the fact is, we do go and settle over there and we still feel lost. And I agree with Raka about the sort of aspects that she's explained about the different connections with respect to food, with respect to his psyche of how he can make himself familiar and comfortable. I agree with Raka that that it's not easy to find a person like Fakrul who makes you feel at home, by saying the word esho, instead of apni. And I think the writer is trying to connect. Can't hear you, Julie.
So here's a tougher question. Shebonti, in the beginning, talked about the use of the German language. Now, I'm being the devil's advocate here, and this is a question to all of you. The question is, some critical impulse in me says, so is this a bit pretentious? Does he really speak German? And what is the German doing there? Would anyone be interested in answering that? Harish, perhaps, who hasn't said a word?
Hello, everyone. The question that asked is, what's the German language doing there? My own view would be that since it's organically there, because obviously the man is in Germany, and I think he's there because the novelist always strives to create an atmosphere of authenticity. So I think in his striving for authenticity, he he has to locate his character in that milieu, and so the language comes from there. But the reason I raised my hand was that very quickly was just to look at one point that I didn't hear others raise, is his music, and how much his music plays into the way he writes. Now, not his plot, but his meandering style, his beginning at one point and then traversing to the next, pretty much like a raga. We'll begin at point A, go to point C, D, E, F, G, and then return to point A. Even as in a poem, you have at least in Urdu poetry, you tend to repeat certain phrases in shairi every few stanzas for effect, for reminding the audience of the key point of that shairi or Urdu poem. So I think some of Chaudhary's stylistic work, I think, comes out of his music. Thank you.
Excellent, Harish. You've really raised the bar today on the discussion. Vivek and I should have picked this up because we've just read Seeking the Raga. But Vivek, I too had completely, not thought about this regarding Sojourn, but maybe there's a lot of truth in there, something worth thinking about, huh? Yeah. Okay, so Vinod, you have, I think you have the wrap up. We have a lot of other friends here today. Mark from Sydney. We have Arundhati Ray. We have Farah Khatun. We have Ruma Sen. Anybody else want to jump in? You're very welcome after Vinod has had his explication. Go ahead, Vinod. Looking forward.
Thank you, Julie, and good evening, everybody. Amit Chaudhary is obviously a master craftsman who breaks free of all conventional forms and writes Sojourn as though it is a poem or, a musical composition. For me, Sojourn seemed to be a series of insightful, high-resolution snapshots with penetrating clarity that strings together into a story of sorts, but ambiguous and disjointed enough to leave me with several unanswered questions that linger on. For the writer, whose craft relies on evasion and deferral, it was a way of exploring the dislocation that he experienced during his stay in Berlin in 2005, partly on account of the encounters with a living past that Germany had not come to terms with. Also for the author, the fall of the Berlin Wall was an event that meant a breakdown of choices as the world transitioned into a unipolar world with free market and globalization as the only alternative. At the same time, the strangeness yet unexpected familiarity that he experienced when he crossed over to East Berlin needed to be explored and understood. As a reader, what struck me first was the minimalist approach, words chosen with great economy, conveying descriptions of the moment, slices of life with every element, be it a person, an object, or a city landmark, becoming a significant character. The author describes his writing in various interviews as anti-humanist, anti-enlightenment form of talking about reality. It's a different kind of storytelling that calls upon the reader to experience the novel with all its gaps, complexities, ambiguities, and abstractions, to then ponder, sometimes reread, and make sense of it all. The reader is free to make sense of his experience of reading the book, just as he is free to do with life itself. The narrator observes the remnants of Germany's past, like the plaques in the paving stones, and the memories that lingers in the people, and feels compelled to get completely absorbed in his experience to a point where he loses his memory, somewhat akin to the way an intense counseling session could affect the counselor, or a challenging role, an intense actor. The fainting episodes and the narrator not being able to remember his own name are intriguing, although the author is of the view that it may not be as disturbing and merely reflects the extent to which the narrator was absorbed within the intense experience prompted by his encounter with Berlin, its lingering past, and its people. Sojourn explores memory and the way we recognize and relate to people and places, while steering clear of identity politics. Small point that struck me about the story is the use of bridegroom in the descriptions on more than one occasion. And I won't read out all the three, page 7, page 25, page 118. And it struck me because a lot of foreign interviewers also have been mentioning this. To me also, I don't know whether it's very apt or appropriate. In one interview, Amit Chaudhary himself says that it's probably my own idiosyncratic understanding of bridegroom that prompted me to include it. But for me, it didn't make, because I can't conceive of, a bridegroom being very similar. Bridegrooms come in all shapes and sizes, and they can all be very different depending upon their own individual personality. That's the only thing that left me intrigued, as to why he did it. But of course, he says it could be his own idiosyncratic understanding of bridegroom. That's it. Thank you so much. That's what I could make sense of.
Vinod, that is almost the excavation of that word bridegroom is almost like a literary critic would want to do. And now you've whetted my appetite. I'm certainly going to look into that a little bit more. Wonderful. Thank you so very much. I will take the, I will impose, should I say, on Professor Arundhati Ray. Are you here, Professor Ray? If you would like to say something, this is a good time. Anyone else? Mark, all the way from Sydney, what did you think of our book exploration today? Okay, all very quiet on that front. So once again, a huge thank you in order to all our participants, our regular contributors, all our family now. And this is our 26th month, guys. So something to be said. As you know, I've asked for a reprieve for December. So we are going to meet in January. The book for January will be the new Booker winner, absolutely smashing, very refreshing, the idea of chats with the dead. This is the Sri Lankan Shehan Karunatilaka's book. My goodness, I'm having a quiet moment here. I will send you the title. It's to do with the 7 moons of Mali. Please try and get that on Amazon or from Flipkart, wherever possible, because we can't get a PDF. My PDF expediter says it's too early in the day. It's just been published. So the 7 Moons of Mali Almeida is the name of the book. And I think it's on the 15th of January that we meet again. In the meantime, if we are all on track to meet the author Amit Chaudhary in person in a hybrid mode, which is virtual for all of you. Most of you are away from Calcutta, but I am told that it's time that I broke my 2.5-year curfew and went and did a live program at the club. So if we do have that, I look forward to seeing you all on the 6th of December, and we'll send you details of that. It'll be exactly the same time, it'll be 6:30 actually, that we meet, and a little conversation with him and me, and then we open up the floor to participants totally. So you're already prepped up. That was my idea. And
so it's the same book.
Yeah, fire away for the same book. So we meet again, guys. I can't tell you how grateful I am. I owe you a great debt of gratitude for sticking together. And now even our guests have become family. So 20 of us, this is just huge in a book club that we've been trying to do since before the pandemic. Take good care, guys. See you very soon.
Thank you, Julie. You made it all happen.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. We'll send you the recording.
Happy New Year in advance.
Yes,
Same to you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you, Farah. Thank you, Raka.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye. Good night.
Night.